In February of 2012, the Office of the Auditor General of British Columbia released a report entitled An Audit of the Ministry of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations Management of Timber. To read the following report and the other supplementary documents, please visit our website at www.bcauditor.com. The following presentation provides an overview of the report. As the nonpartisan independent auditor of the Legislative Assembly, the Auditor General is the auditor of the government reporting entity. The government reporting entity consists of ministries, crown corporations, and other government organizations such as universities, colleges, school districts, health authorities, and similar organizations that are controlled by or accountable to the provincial government. Our office serves the people of British Columbia and their elected representatives by conducting independent audits and advising on how government is managing its responsibilities and resources. Our mandate under the Auditor General Act allows us to conduct both financial audits and performance audits. This report resulted from a performance audit. BC's forests contribute to employment, tourism, and recreational opportunities. Our forests generate significant revenue for government to finance public services. However, trends indicate that the future availability of timber will be smaller and less diverse, putting future revenue opportunities at risk. The total area of British Columbia is 95 million hectares, 55 million of which is forested. Approximately 22 million hectares of this forested area is currently available for timber production and harvesting. Our audit focused on the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations management of this 22 million hectares. This exhibit is on page 14 of the report. It shows the cycle of forest stewardship, or the responsible management of our forests, for both present and future generations. Industry is legally obligated to reforest the areas it harvests, and it does reforest. It replants healthy, commercially valuable trees to meet certain height, density, and species requirements. When a harvested area meets these requirements, it is declared free-growing, and industry's obligation to this area are complete. As shown in this exhibit, it generally takes 7 to 20 years to achieve the state of free-growing. Stewardship responsibilities then return to the government and continue until the trees are deemed harvestable and the cycle begins again. However, government, which is responsible for over 90% of BC's forests, is not clear about its own reforestation commitments. We carried out this audit to determine whether the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations is achieving its forest objectives for timber. We asked 3 questions. Number 1. Has the ministry clearly defined its forest objectives for timber? Number 2. Does the ministry have the management practices it needs to achieve its objectives for timber? Number 3. Does the ministry appropriately monitor and report its timber results against its objectives for timber? We reached the following conclusions. Number 1. The ministry has not clearly defined its timber objectives. Without clearly defining its timber objectives, the ministry cannot ensure that its management practices are effective. Number 2. Existing management practices are insufficient to offset a trend towards future forests having a lower timber supply and less species diversity in some areas. Number 3. The ministry does not appropriately monitor and report its timber results against its timber objectives. Let's take a brief look at each of the 3 audit conclusions, starting with defining timber objectives. We found that the ministry has not developed strategic timber objectives that guide decision-making and demonstrate the outcomes it wants to see at the provincial level. 2 areas in particular need to be more clearly defined. Whether the desired timber outcome seeks to achieve a targeted volume, value, or species diversity, or some combination of each, and how current economic interests are balanced with provincial environmental, economic, and social opportunities for present and future generations. This lack of clarity is of particular concern given the significant issues and risks currently facing British Columbia's forests. Government has a window of opportunity to share our future forests by responding to such things as the mountain pine beetle devastation with a strategic reforestation plan and cost-effective stewardship. In the area of defining timber objectives, we recommend that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations develop a plan for directing forest stewardship that establishes clearly defined timber objectives and stewardship principles to guide decision-making, actions, timeframes, and assessment of results. Government needs to establish a plan that states its long-term timber objectives and focuses its resources in order to foster economic stability and quality of life for British Columbians now and in the future. Let's look at management practices, which is the area of our second audit conclusion. The Ministry estimates that as much as 1.1 million hectares of forest, or 5% of harvestable forest within its area of responsibility have potential for replanting. We found a significant gap between this total area suitable for replanting and the total area replanted by the Ministry. Forests for Tomorrow is a program established in 2005 to reforest areas impacted by the mountain pine beetle and wildfire. Replanting activities funded by this program averaged 8,730 hectares a year over the past 5 years, despite a plan calling for a reforestation of 22,000 hectares a year. As such, we recommend that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations ensure that its investments in silviculture are sufficient to achieve long-term timber objectives, and that they align their stewardship principles and are cost-effective. While the Ministry has stewardship responsibilities, so do forest companies. Since 1987, industry has been responsible for reforesting the areas it harvests according to Ministry-approved standards. Since 2004, these standards must be achieved within 20 years of harvesting. Currently, about 2.3 million hectares, or 11% of the timber harvesting land base, are under industry obligation. With respect to industry stewardship, Ministry assessments generally conclude that forest companies achieve their reforestation obligations and are doing so sooner than in the past. Industry is motivated to achieve their restocking obligations as soon as possible in order to reduce their financial liability and risks. In the area of reforesting, we found a trend towards less species diversity in some areas. In particular, Ministry evaluations raised concerns about harvesting high-value species of trees and then reforesting with low-value species, reforesting areas only with a single tree species, and the suitability of the stocking standards in light of climate change. Diversity in tree species can help minimize known health risks, reduce vulnerability to climate change, and help maintain a valuable supply of timber. As such, we recommend that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations ensure that restocking activities result in the establishment of forests that are consistent with the long-term timber objectives. In the area of monitoring and reporting, we concluded that the Ministry does not appropriately monitor and report its timber results against its timber objectives. We found areas for improvement regarding the information available to management in making important decisions. For example, there is limited information on areas affected by pests, diseases, wildfires, and other natural disturbances. We also found that the data entries made by industry in the Ministry's harvest and replanting database were often incomplete. Many entries required modifications because mapping or silviculture data was missing, or they did not meet the Ministry's data quality specifications. Without sufficient information in these areas, the Chief Forester has to estimate the effect of disturbances rather than rely on a more valid, updated inventory. Because limited information is available about forest conditions after free growing is declared, the Ministry relies heavily on the accuracy of its growth and yield projections to predict timber productivity. Current Ministry research raises questions about the accuracy of the growth and yield projections. As a result of these findings, we recommend that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations ensures that its information systems reflect actual forest conditions in the priority management areas. Areas for improvement regarding the Ministry's oversight framework of industry include the following: Forest Stewardship Plans. Industry is required to complete and comply with forest stewardship plans. Their plan establishes their stewardship responsibilities from harvesting to reforestation and is approved by the Ministry. These plans create an opportunity for industry to propose new and innovative approaches to forest management. However, we found that the plans were generally vague, stated non-measurable commitments that could restrict the Ministry's ability to enforce or hold licensees accountable, and proposed few innovations. Nearly half of the 204 stewardship plans were scheduled for renewal in 2012. However, the Ministry has yet to demonstrate how the weaknesses identified will be addressed. Compliance and enforcement. We found that the Ministry has not demonstrated whether its existing compliance and enforcement inspections are sufficiently robust to ensure industry compliance. We noted a steady decline in forest practice inspections. However, this reduction did not appear related to a greater degree of compliance by industry. Effectiveness evaluations. Effectiveness evaluations are designed to determine whether policies, plans, or practices result in the desired objectives being met. The Forest and Range Evaluation Program conducts these evaluations and identified a number of issues relating to the development and expectations of forests after they are declared free growing. Despite these individual concerns with the oversight framework, we found no assessment of the risks posed to the success of the framework or whether changes are needed. As such, we recommend that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations ensure that the collective and individual components of its oversight framework are sufficient to ensure the achievement of long-term timber objectives. Finally, we expected the Ministry to have developed and reported on performance measures that demonstrate how they are meeting their timber objectives. Instead, we found areas for improvement. Reporting is not comprehensive enough. We found that the performance measures taken as a whole do not provide the information needed to demonstrate progress over time, or indicate whether the overall condition of the forest is increasing or decreasing in terms of volume, value, or species diversity. Performance measures are not appropriately focused. Where performance measures are included, we found that they focused primarily on activities and outputs and seldom compared progress over time against the intended result. We also found that there is no distinction between industry and ministry performance. The performance measures do not distinguish between industry or government stewardship, making it difficult to assess their individual performance. The measures should show how current results are balanced with their long-term economic and social impacts, as well as how they will affect the future forest. Our recommendation in this area is that the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations develop and implement appropriate performance measures to demonstrate progress towards achieving long-term timber objectives and report publicly on the results. That concludes our summary for this report. To read this report and our other publications, or for more information about our office, please visit our website at www.bcauditor.com. The Auditor General encourages your feedback on this report, as well as your suggestions for further audits. We look forward to hearing from you.